I brought a stack of The Communist into work with me. Within a few minutes, I saw coworkers gazing over. I told them that I'm a communist and this is my party's paper and passed them around.
The boldness of saying, I'm selling The Communist with a big hammer and sickle on it. Very proudly proclaim who you are, what you believe, and what your mission is.
We just had our waiter come over and we had just had this paper sitting on the table and she was like looking at it and she said, are you guys the ones who just had like a march down the street earlier today?
A single comrade in a union hall can have a huge impact. What can you do if you have 10,000 communists organized into a fighting formation from coast to coast? You can have influence. It's no good being an isolated communist or an online communist. We need to move away from that. How do we do it? That's what The Communist is here to offer.
Our brand new podcast, Communists of America, hit the airwaves last week. And while that was happening, our brand new paper, The Communist, was hitting the streets of major cities and towns across the U.S. Antonio Balmer, managing editor of The Communist, is here today to explain why our party is producing a printed newspaper and how you can use it and contribute to it. So, Antonio, what is The Communist?
Well, The Communist is a new paper for a new chapter in U.S. politics. There's a new force that's hitting the political landscape. And it's the communist generation. You have to understand these things together. There are hundreds of thousands of communists out there with a burning desire to overthrow capitalism. This paper is their voice, and it's designed to be a mirror that reflects their ideas, their aspirations, their attitude. But more importantly, it reflects their activity. We are launching the largest communist recruitment campaign since World War II. The Communist is the live bulletin of those efforts from coast to coast.
So this newspaper is the voice of the revolutionary communists of America. Just to say that even literally the day that it was basically just off the press, almost inadvertently, comrades were recruiting with it. Just sitting on the train, pull out the paper, and bam, just like that, communists are flocking to us.
Yeah, we just released the first issue of The Communist. I was really excited to read it, so I popped it open while I was on the train on my way home. And I looked up for a second, and I noticed someone was taking a picture of me. I got excited. I was like, are you a communist? And they said, yeah, I'm a communist. We got into a great conversation. They bought a copy of the paper, and I can tell they were really into it. I was like, hey, yeah, if you know other communists, yeah, you should try to sell them a paper too, maybe bring them into the organization. And they were like, yeah, I would love to do that. And then like a couple days later, they messaged me. It's like, did you check your Venmo? I was like, what? Yeah, I sent you $5. I sold a copy of the paper. And yeah, they came to branch the week after and said they wanted to join. So paper sells itself.
This actually happened to us before we even had the first issue of the paper ready. We were sitting outside a cafe in Manhattan, discussing with a comrade who was going to help with the production of the paper. And we had a rough draft of it. And so you had basically the cover page of the first edition.
It was just a template, right? Like it had no actual content. It had the Greek, the Latin sentences.
It had some lorem ipsum. Yeah, there was some of that. But I mean, it looked basically what the front page looks like today. And I don't think all of 3 minutes passed between the time we pulled it out of our backpack to start discussing it to where someone stopped on the sidewalk at our table in front of this cafe and said, is that a communist newspaper? And we had to immediately switch into recruitment mode. And this person actually told us, I've been looking to learn about Lenin. And we flipped the paper over. There's a picture of Lenin. Mm-hmm. And we started discussing this upcoming, the Lenin school we were organizing in New York and the day of recruitment and all of this. But we quickly realized we actually have to put the paper away if we want to get through our meeting. But it really goes to show, I mean, this is the whole premise of launching this paper is the political vacuum that's out there. There's a huge demand for communist ideas. And if people can identify that you have something that contains communist ideas in it, they want to get a copy of it.
We wasted no time, basically, as soon as the paper was produced to announce it to the world. And on April 6th, last Saturday, we organized launch rallies, recruitment activities, marches in city after city, and the paper made a big impact.
I just ran into this woman, and she said that she didn't really know much about communism, but she was interested in getting the paper because we seemed very motivated and politically active. We had a little short political discussion with her, and she had purchased the paper, her and her husband. And then when we had walked away a little bit, we were talking to other people, she ran back up to us and she wanted to let us know that that was the most organized and well put together paper that she's ever seen, and that she's very interested. So that just like goes to show the response of people. You know, this is like, we put a lot of hard work into the Communist. It's a weapon, you know, like we can use it and people notice it. It's visually pleasing. It's a beautiful paper, and you know, it will make us, so we find that layer. We find that layer of these 30 million communists that we're looking for in New York City.
So yes, it's a nice paper, but I do think we should ask the question, why are we producing a newspaper in this day and age where we have, you know, the digital world, there's social media, there's polls that show what's the percentage of people that get their news from TikTok? Something like 30% of 18 to 29-year-olds. And so that begs the question, why are we producing a printed newspaper? We don't do it just because we're like retro or we want like a pretty, like something nice that looks good. That's not the purpose, right? So yeah, why are we doing this?
Well, first of all, our press, broadly speaking, includes all the media at our disposal for getting the message of the party out to a broad layer of the population, which includes all our digital media. We're all for YouTube and the podcast here and everything else we can do to get the ideas out there. But when you have digital media, you're basically talking about one person consuming content on a screen with headphones in your ears. It happens alone or in your own world when you're commuting. The point of having something physical is that we want to have a tool that we can use to engage people in real life interactions. You can't go into a crowd or a picket line and all you're armed with is a podcast recommendation. That's no way to organize. But if you have something physical that, by the way, shows an entire vast operation behind it, that's the point. When you open up the paper, you realize there's an active organization that is having an impact on the political landscape. And this paper is a reflection of those activities. That's what you're recruiting to.
You know, there was a comment in a YouTube video that we posted to promote the newspaper. Someone commented, I used to work in publishing or something like that. And I'm telling you right now, get out of the print newspaper business. It's like our purpose is, this is not a business enterprise to sell print newspapers, right? We're not in the business of reviving bourgeois print media like the New York Times or the New York Post, all of these things. The circulation's down, so we shouldn't do it. The point is, this is a fundamentally different thing.
Yeah, print media might be on the decline, but the business of Bolshevism is about to go through a massive boom, so we're getting ready for that.
Exactly. I want to quote from, maybe we can link this in the description, but I'm going to quote from a resolution that was approved by the Communist International in 1921. It's a really great document that this was a period where communist parties were being launched everywhere, inspired by the success of the Russian Revolution, and mainly under the guidance of the Russian organization that had taken power. They were giving advice. How do we organize active communist parties? And about the revolutionary press, here's what they said. They said that the communist newspaper must strive to become a communist enterprise, a proletarian combat organization, a working collective of revolutionary workers, of all those who regularly write for the paper, who print it, manage it, circulate and sell it, those who collect local material for articles, discuss this material in the cells and write it up, those who are active daily in the paper's distribution, etc. And so basically, this is a place where we can actually synthesize the day-to-day communist activity of all of our cells, all of our comrades, and use it in turn to actually build more cells.
This is actually the basics of Bolshevism. This idea goes back to Lenin, and you could say, okay, the world in the 2020s is not the same as what Lenin was doing in Russia at the early 20th century. That may be true, but Lenin understood that if you want to have a small group of Marxists who have the ideas required to overthrow capitalism, to transform society, those Marxists better have some means for getting their ideas into the hands of a much broader layer of the working class in order to strengthen the movement and give it a coherent, consistent ideological backbone. That's what a physical print paper can do.
Basically, we're not pretending to like imitate what happened in the past for sentimental reasons, to just stand in a street corner and shout like, get your copy of a newspaper. Of course, the world is different today. And in the past, for the Bolsheviks, the newspaper was almost the only way that they could transmit ideas. Of course, things are a little different, right? So in terms of just distribution of ideas, we have a website, we have this podcast that you're listening to right now. We do have our social media, and those are more effective means just for distribution of our views. But in terms of the purpose for building on the ground, so we can use those ideas not just to, scroll on your phone as an individual, but actually turn it into in real life communist organizing in workplace cells, in schools, and so forth. The paper is an invaluable tool for that.
And that's the impact that we're noticing. You can bring this into your workplace, bring it into the break room, start having conversations with it. We had one comrade who brought it into the break room at his landscaping company.
I'm a landscaper at UCSD Hospital in San Diego, and last week I brought a stack of The Communist in to work with me. I'm still the new guy. I wasn't really sure how my mostly older coworkers would react, but we gotta be bold, right? So I brought it out at lunch and just started reading it. Within a few minutes, I saw coworkers gazing over. I told them that I'm a communist and this is my party's paper, and passed some around. Some eyes lit up, some started telling stories of class struggles in the past decades, and another just wanted to read what I had wrote in there and was just interested in the paper despite not being a communist himself. As one of them flipped through it, I pointed out the greetings from our Mexican section. I told them we're an international organization and that we think working people like myself and him should be running society, not the billionaires and the bankers, and that our struggles are the same on either side of the border right here. And he said that's how it should be. And he said it looks like you guys got a whole movement going on. He's really excited, and I told him, yeah, absolutely, we do. Our union local here has a potential strike coming up this fall as the new contract gets negotiated. And in tandem with the November elections, I think this will be a very radicalizing moment for workers here. And if they know I'm a communist, I can show them firsthand how we're always the most militant class fighters, always down to struggle. Hopefully from this, I can recruit more coworkers to the RCA.
It's not just that we're relaying ideas into the movement. We are trying to do that. We are a transmission belt for a Marxist worldview into the class struggle. But in addition, we are basically the early symptoms of a mass radicalization, a tidal wave of communism that's going to come into U.S. politics in the coming years, precisely because of what is driving that radicalization. Those forces are the decline of capitalism. It's the crises that this ruling class is completely incapable of getting a grip on. Those are the things that are producing communists every day. And that's a process that's only going to accelerate and intensify. That means we urgently have to prepare ahead of that tidal wave. That's kind of the call to action that you get by reading through The Communist.
And everything that Antonio just said is explained in the pages of The Communist, right? So there's a declaration about the aims of the revolutionary communists of America, that we are here for the complete overthrow of capitalism, an explanation of the role of the press and why we have this newspaper. And then a whole series of articles about precisely that point, the decline of capitalism, with charts showing all the different metrics about how bad things have gotten in the US since the 1970s, and explanations about the changes in consciousness, and then just report after report. I'm going to read some. The bus driver wanted a poster, a communist poster. I built a new communist cell over my spring break. That's a comrade who went to Washington, D.C. as a lone communist and built a cell. After just 1 week, we're going to actually invite that comrade Nico to our podcast in a future episode so he can explain how he achieved this. So it's page after page showing what are comrades doing around the country, so it can be used as a guide for the work of other communists, of those unorganized communists who are atomized at their home and who can see this and realize I'm not alone, and actually can use this newspaper to find other communists and get organized myself.
It gives you a more concrete idea of what kind of activity you should be conducting in your day-to-day as a communist. I mean, it kind of gives you a vivid picture of what it means to be a communist. One anecdote in this the first issue of the paper that I really enjoyed, the headline we used, "My call for class war militancy got applause from coworkers."
On March 10th, my union, Local 638 Steamfitters of the Building Trades, we had our contract vote, and the proposal for this vote was a 5% wage increase over the course of 3 years, amongst some other conditional things. But, if inflation rises to 6% over those 3 years, then this 5% increase is really a loss. That's compounding from the 14% loss that we took from 2019 to 2023. At the meeting itself, the discussion for the vote, I got up and I spoke about this, and that we shouldn't be taking this standing down. The business agents will always say we're making too much money, that we've priced ourselves out of the market, and that we need to do things to make ourselves more marketable. I said, well, the bosses never say that they make too much money. They'll never tell you that they're pricing themselves out of the market. In fact, all they'll say is that they're not making enough money. And I brought up the fact that the NYC nurses and the UAW and the UPS all either went on strike or threatened to go on strike and won double-digit wage increases over 3 or 4 years, and that it was the militancy that was able to win them big gains. And that's the militancy that we need to return to. And as I was saying this, more than half of the crowd started applauding, this very impassioned applause. But anyways, after the contract vote, it ended up passing, but 20% of the union voted it down. And outside, when we were all kind of chit-chatting, a bunch of people, I would say 20 to 25 people came up to me to shake my hand. One person told me that I was the voice of the young generation in our union. And I had political discussions with all of them. And there seemed to be this desire to return to that militancy, a very healthy desire. And people seem completely fed up. It's interesting to see what's going on now, and that people are rejecting what their leadership is telling them.
By the way, that comrade really prepared. He studied up. He did his homework the night before, studying the contract, getting his arguments ready. And so, it's not just having the confidence, it's also having the ideas, having clear perspectives. That's what gives you that backbone that you need. I think it's also important that as people are reading these anecdotes and they're reading the reports that are coming in, they realize, this is all made possible just because other comrades like you are sending this material in. And really, we have a network of correspondents for the communists, and it's hundreds of people in cities across the country who are not only going about their daily recruitment activities and building the party, but they're sending in reports that make it clear what this activity looks like. And that's so useful.
When Lenin really made the case for basically what he called an all-Russian newspaper, which was to be Iskra, part of the reason was that he had this communist movement emerging in Russia, but it was all these different groups that were popping up everywhere. They were all isolated in specific neighborhoods or cities, and they didn't really have a central line. There was no unity in action or ideological, for that matter. And part of the idea of the newspaper is to say, we need to merge all these layers into a single unified force that can act together, that can actually make an impact. And I think there's a lot of parallels between that and the emerging communist movement in the US, because we're saying there's millions of communists out there, but they're not organized into a cohesive communist party. I mean, potentially we're talking about a mass communist party in this country, but what is the roadmap to actually uniting those forces? Part of the power of the newspaper is to say that if you're a communist, there's communists around you. How do you organize? And if you get a bundle of the paper, which you can order from marxistbooks.com, you get the paper and you say, let's organize a discussion based on this paper. Let's just all sit down and read through the pages and then do activity based on that. You sell it around, and just like that, you've organized a communist cell, but it is not an isolated communist cell just doing local activity. It is informed by that nationwide operation. So it's actually part of this greater whole that can, over time, gain much, much broader influence and have a much bigger impact. When we talk about the newspaper as the scaffolding of the party, that's the role it plays. Is if we want to have hundreds and hundreds of new communist cells everywhere, which we absolutely need, and it's absolutely possible based on the reports that we're getting, then this newspaper can be the tool around which all of those circles are organized. And comrades can get their political training and education and examples of what kind of activity to do from that and build those cells.
It's an important parallel. Any communist who's active today should really make a point to study the early days of Bolshevism. There's so much for us to learn about the way that Lenin approached this task. And there are even historical parallels in a sense. I mean, okay, America in the 2020s is not the same as Russia in 1900. We've made that clear. But there was a big shift, an organic shift happening in the political landscape of Russia at the time, and people were gravitating in a massive way towards Marxist ideas. And it was happening in a spontaneous manner. It wasn't coordinated, as you say. It wasn't organized. It wasn't centralized. And so Lenin's task, he basically stepped forward as a minority of that organic, emerging movement and said, we are the organized wing of this generation. Let's gather the rest of the generation together around a battle plan. Let's do something with this power that we have in numbers by concentrating that power, by getting organized. And that's exactly what we're saying to the communist generation of today. The revolutionary communists of America is a vast generation. Those in the ranks of this party are a small minority of it. But we are the wing of that generation that is organized, that is hell-bent on organizing the rest of the communists in this country, everyone who wants to fight. And again, using these examples of recent activity and initiative that show that a single comrade in a union hall during a meeting to discuss the contract can have a huge impact. What can you do if you have 10,000 communists organized into a fighting formation from coast to coast in their unions, in their workplaces, bringing these ideas into the discussion with the coworkers in a systematic way? You can have influence. You can have an impact on the political landscape. Every communist should be thinking about, how do we arrive at that point? It's no good being an isolated communist or an online communist. I think this generation is sick of just being stuck in like Twitter comments, YouTube. I mean, we need to move away from that. I think people are looking for, how do we do it? That's what the communist is here to offer.
Since you made that point, I mean, I think it's also worth pointing out, we don't think that social media is an obstacle to organizing as such. And a lot of people are radicalized online, but it is certainly not prone to getting you hitting the streets. I mean, these tech corporations that own and control those forms of media, design them, spend billions and billions of dollars in technological resources to design them to just get you addicted so they can make more money, steal your personal data, and sell you products. So that's just to say that part of what we want to do with this podcast and with our online presence is to break that loop and actually break that atomization and actually get people organized and into the streets. On that note, that was the intention behind organizing the April 6th nationwide day of party activities and recruitment and agitation, to go out there, have conversations with people, sell the communist. I mean, we can't list all the cities where we had activities, but from Chicago to Minneapolis to Dallas, Atlanta, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and San Diego, all those comrades had rallies and events. In Seattle, the comrades sold over 100 copies of The Communist in just a few hours. So comrades had a blast, and most importantly, they spread the ideas and they recruited to the party.
It's been very almost like inspiring. It's very energetic. I think the boldness of saying, I'm selling the communist with a big hammer and sickle on it, it's something that there's some congruence within you to very proudly proclaim who you are, what you believe, and what your mission is here today. And I think that energy is also felt by the people that you're selling it to. You know, people that maybe before would just kind of walk by, they see those symbols, they hear that words, they see the energy that you're giving, and they're interested.
We just had our waiter come over, and we had just had this paper sitting on the table, and she was like looking at it, and she said, aren't you guys the ones who just had like a march down the street earlier today? She just invited us to go come smoke a cigarette or something. But she saw the march down the street, and like she saw our paper, and clearly they kind of like jumped out to her. and was memorable enough seeing it just say in gigantic letters, the communist hammer and sickle.
Let's hear a report from the front lines in New York City.
I sold 5 papers. I got 2 new contacts. People seem pretty interested. Generally the vibe seems very good.
Yeah, I sold a couple of papers.
I sold my first paper, and again, I got 2 contacts as well. I've had a lot of great conversations with just random people who are so excited and so interested.
Yeah.
I love being out here. Yeah.
Very revitalizing.
Even the people that we don't sell papers to, sometimes we engage them in dialogue for half an hour. Sometimes they say some things that are a bit okay, well, but overwhelmingly, people seem to know, there's a sense of discontent. They might not go to communism as the answer, but people here don't. No one I've spoken to has been yeah, I love capitalism. I mean, actually, there was one guy, but he looked like a capitalist, so I figured he would actually like capitalism.
Yeah,
we made a lot of sales, fantastic work with the agitation. Overall, great time.
Somebody wanted to buy the paper, but we didn't have change, and they said, okay, I'm going to come back later for change. We did not believe that they were actually going to come back, but they did. So that was pretty cool.
I think we're finding that the more bold we are and the more focus we put into trying to build locally, the more success that we're having.
Some people are walking around with the ideas that we constantly discuss at branch meetings and whatnot, and they're just waiting for somebody to be in their face, basically.
We haven't discussed this. I think it's worth noting they kept talking about selling the paper. Obviously, we've discussed the role of the press itself. We're not newspaper salespeople. We're communists trying to find other communists. But why sell it?
Yeah, you're right. It's not that we're selling a product like it's a commodity and we're just trying to make money on it. But when people give you a financial contribution, they're basically putting their money where their mouth is, and they're providing resources for the party to conduct its activity. And it's a way of people providing a material support. They're materially vouching for what you're doing, and they're helping to spread our influence. Those resources are essential for us to be able to expand our activities. I mean, if you want to conduct a war, then you better have resources for that. And the class war needs its resources.
I mean, the New York Times sells their paper even though they're backed by billionaires. I mean, we need to maintain our political independence through financial independence. I think that should be clear enough. Where else would we get our money? The capitalists are not going to fund what we're doing unless we're compromising what we're doing on what we're saying, right?
We don't get a penny from any capitalist anywhere in the world. And there's a lot of organizations out there that cannot say the same.
Now, someone might say, are we preaching to the choir? Actually, during our conversations on April 6th out in the street, some people commented well, why does the paper say communist? Maybe that's a bit much. Shouldn't it be appealing to broader layers and basically turn them into communists by pandering to where they're at, as opposed to the word communism, which there's a lot of people who are in favor of it, right? About 20% of the population. But that means 80% of the population doesn't necessarily have a good opinion of communism. I'm sure a lot of them have a very bad opinion of communism because of, the propaganda that has been peddled in the US for so long. So what do we say to that?
Well, I believe that actually the majority of the working class would find agreement with most of the content of our ideas. The majority. When you say we want a shorter work week, we don't want to spend most of our income on rent. We want your rent to be capped at 10% of your income. The Fortune 500 companies, what would we do? What would we be able to do if we had those resources at the disposal of of all of society, and the working class could democratically administer that wealth? You could shorten the working week. People could retire early. You could have free education and healthcare. These ideas appeal to a broad layer of society. I think the only thing limiting it is, our ability to get that message out there. Now, does that mean that everyone is looking for the hammer and sickle and sees the red flags and their heart warms? Not yet. What we're saying is there's a minority that has drawn the conclusion. They've kind of crossed the bridge entirely, and they realize capitalism needs to be overthrown. And I'm not saying that the vast majority of the working class has drawn that conclusion yet, but a significant minority has. Now, if we can gather that significant minority, and I'm talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people, get them organized, get them to be able to transmit their message systematically, then you have a road to those millions behind them. And that's the thing we need to understand. Organizing, say, the first 10,000 is going to be the step towards organizing the first million. So you can only do that if you're very clear. I mean, we need to be crystal clear about our politics. Yes, we are Marxists. We are here to defend the legacy of Bolshevism. We are communists. And we're not going to water those things down in the hopes of reaching a broader audience artificially.
Lenin, in Where to Begin, which is a masterpiece about a communist strategy, he explains this. He said that those who regard social democracy as an organization serving exclusively the spontaneous struggle of the proletariat may be content with merely local agitation and working class literature, pure and simple. So he's saying, and by the way, social democracy at the time, that's what the communist parties were, right? It was Marxist parties. And he's saying we don't just talk about working class issues and draw people in just on the basis of capitalism is bad, how do we raise your wages? You don't leave it at just that kind of lower common denominator. We regard social democracy as a revolutionary party inseparably connected with the working class movement and directed against the system. Only when organized in such a party will the broader working class be in a position to fulfill the historical task that confronts it, a successful revolution against the power of the state, and so forth. So the point is, there's discontent in society. People are angry. And we want to direct that anger to something a lot more powerful than just being pissed off. So we actually want to raise the movement from where it's at, from that discontent and polarization and anger that's kind of diffuse, and give it a conscious expression in the program of communism, which is the only one that can actually achieve the change that we need. To illustrate this point, let's look at the impact of comrades talking to people who are not yet communists, but who bought a copy of The Communists.
Say, we're not watering down our message.
Yeah.
We're not going to hide our revolutionary ideas. We're going to put them even farther, front and center, right?
Yeah. I think people are upset and they want something to move towards. They're tired. They know Trump's bad. They know Biden's bad.
Yeah.
Just sitting here with the doomism, this is bad, this sucks. But I think that element of the first thing we are putting forward is we are communists. We have a goal. We have somewhere we want to go. A lot of people, maybe that before probably wouldn't consider communism, they're frustrated with their system and they're ready for a change. And I think it's our duty to capture those people before they go potentially to the wrong direction.
I talked to a guy today who said, when I asked him, oh, are you a communist? He came up to us. And he said, well, I'm not a communist. And then I asked him, well, do you hate capitalism and you want to overthrow it? And he said, hell yeah. And we had a really good conversation about the paper. I showed him some of the statistics about the death rates of young people nowadays, the deaths of despair. And he was working on some farms in Oregon, and he was saying, look, the exact same things that we're talking about right now, I would talk about this with people that were on the far right. They would be extremely sympathetic, but as long as you didn't mention the word communism. And then we sold him a paper, and he took another one and said he's going to show it to his friends. And we showed him the reports that were on the paper. He was really inspired by it because we said, look, this is a guide to build. And he's like, that is exactly what we need to be doing.
I just spoke with the European man. I don't know what part of Europe he was from, but he was talking about the crisis of capitalism there, the disparities of wealth. And, he said, I might be a communist. He said, I'm not right now, but eventually I will be. And that just shows how, that's why we have to get ready before the revolution, because come the revolution, people like him are going to be right by our side in this fight, no matter if he's a communist now or not.
I mean, I was pretty sold as soon as you guys were like, "Hey, are you communist?"
Yep.
Hey. I'm not really an outspoken communist. I don't think I'm necessarily a communist, but I know that this shit does not.
I mean, a couple months ago, I don't know if I would consider myself a communist, because it's like one of those things. There's so much stigma around it, but realistically, that's the way to go. Honestly, if you don't like capitalism.
Basically, the point is we do want communism to be a mass force. At some point, we will be able to paint communism in a good light to the broader masses. You can't do that with a few thousand people or even with 10,000 people who are atomized and not actually exerting that influence. Once you have communists in every workplace who are, stepping forward like our comrades are to defend workers' rights, to present a class struggle perspective, all these things, and they identify as communist while saying all of those things. But it's not just happening in one workplace, it's happening everywhere. That communism is going to mean something very different. I mean, we always say, yeah, people don't like quote unquote communism because they don't know what communism is. They only know what the ruling class has told them communism is. They don't have any example of communist work, actual communist work. But we can start from where we are to organize that vanguard of the class on the basis of ideological clarity without blurring lines. And from there, it's going to look a lot different when we have 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 active communists all around the country. So this brings us back to the points that we made at the beginning of the episode, which are also the whole point of launching the Party of the Revolutionary Communists of America, is the whole thrust behind our podcast and all of our publications, which is the need to urgently merge with this huge layer of already existing communists, be visible to that layer, organize it. And to this end, our comrades in Minneapolis organized a large march through the city, a communist march with hammer and sickles, red flags. Let's hear from those comrades.
Today, suffering and despair alongside the most technology and wealth we have ever seen on this earth. But that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a tiny minority who live like parasites off of the people they exploit, the working class.
Shame.
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 Tell me, do you think that's right?
No.
Are you sick of living under capitalism?
Hell yeah.
Then you are not alone. Capitalism will make you feel like you are alone, like you are powerless, that there is nothing you can do. But there are millions of people out there that feel the same way as you. Millions of people who are sick of capitalism, and they want to fight.
This is Armand with the Revolutionary Communists in Minneapolis.
I'm Milos.
Hello, I'm Saya.
We just organized a large rally and march through the downtown of the city titled Down with the Two Parties, Join the Communists. The comrades started in front of the city hall where we had comrades giving speeches about burning issues in the movement.
We are in an election year between two of the most unpopular candidates in history, the racist right-wing demagogue Trump and genocide Joe.
And the black poverty rate of Minnesotans is 4 times the white poverty rate. We will take on the legacy of racism through massive investments in jobs, healthcare, and education to eradicate all disparities in quality of life.
The working class has to fight to transform education into a lifelong aim in itself, the opposite of what capitalists need it for. So we cannot have both, which is why we have to kick capitalism out of education. Kick capitalism out of education!
They leave hundreds of thousands of workers with nowhere to live but the streets. That's why I say, as us workers who build and produce, these landlords have no use.
And then after that, we rallied and we got them into the street, marching through the streets of downtown Minneapolis, past all the HQs of the corporations and the big banks. Once we got to the Wells Fargo Center, we stopped there. And it was this moment of anticipation. And Jameson gets up and just starts haranguing the banks. How they defrauded us in 2008, how they were responsible for the crash of the economy.
When we take the profit motive from these banks, we will no longer need to be afraid of an economic crash or high interest rates.
That money sitting in those bank vaults that they've got, well, that's our money, and then the crowd started chanting, our money, and then he explains if they're too big to fail,
then they're too big to be left in the hands of private industry.
And that's why I say nationalize the banks. Everybody chanted, nationalize the banks, nationalize the banks, nationalize the banks, nationalize the banks, nationalize the banks. And it was just such uplift.
Obviously, we're a revolutionary organization that wants to see the overthrow and the end of capitalism. So our chants were revolutionary, and my voice is gone right now because of how loud I wanted to chant them. You would never hear chants like that at any other protest.
I've been going to protests and marches and all that stuff for 20 20 years before I can even remember. And I've never been to a rally where most of the flags are red hammer and sickle flags, and where it's openly communist chants, openly anti-capitalist chants, openly against the Democratic Party and the DFL. It was just so refreshing.
I'd say for me, I felt very excited. People were really looking forward to the conversations and to joining the organization. I felt especially happy when Armand asked who's ready to join and we saw hands going up. It's going to be really exciting to see the people in my branch double, and then comrades within the organization as they continue to multiply.
It filled me with revolutionary optimism to see what our organization can do, like what we can do as a unit whenever we've all put our minds to something, and about where like the movement is at as a whole. Like, there are communists that are out there that are ready to get organized. They just need to know about us. They just need to find us, and we're doing that right now through our door knocking campaigns, our postering, our leafleting in major workplaces. It's really amazing to be a part of something kind of near the start of the growth of a huge movement.
It really felt like this was the communist movement out fully on display. We had the giant Revolutionary Communists of America banner that was leading it. We had a sea of red flags with the hammer and sickle on it. We had the Palestinian flags as well, chanting down with Genocide Joe and Intifada until victory.
And by the way, the right wing, again, didn't fail to take notice.
The chair of the Republican Party of Minnesota, David Hann, issued the following statement about the Revolutionary Communists of America rally and march in Minneapolis today. Minnesota is on the front line at a critical juncture in history, and the battle between freedom and totalitarianism is raging in this state. He goes on to reference that last fall, a Marxism training weekend was offered in the Twin Cities. We put that on. Back when we put that on, he had also issued a statement talking about our Minneapolis Marxist school. And let's see here. He goes on to say, "I will continue to warn Minnesotans that the consequences of unchecked socialism and communism are real. We, Republicans and Democrats alike, must take action to prevent its spread by speaking out about the realities of the agenda of the Revolutionary Communists of America." So, comrades, maybe you can explain to these Republicans, what is the agenda?
We want to nationalize all the key industries of the economy, like the banks, the hospitals, the railways, the electric systems, and put them under democratic workers' control. We want to cut the work week down to 20 hours a week, cap rent at 10% of income, guarantee universal health care, housing, end all imperialist wars or any imperialist war that the United States is involved in.
Republicans that are out there, is that really so bad? Is it really so bad if the workers are in power and ran all of the industries and took back control out of the hands of the billionaires? The vast majority of us are workers, and we think that the leaders of the Republican Party are trying to fool you into voting and acting against their class interests. They try to say that, immigrants are the enemy or LGBT people are the enemy. Well, look at Elon Musk, look at Jeff Bezos, and look at Donald Trump. These people, they get all of their wealth from the labor of the working class, and we think that you workers, you should have control over all of it. Not 1 cent should go to the capitalists. So if you think that this sounds like maybe a good idea and maybe socialism and communism would actually benefit you, then feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk. And also, Chairman David Hann, if you ever want to have a conversation with a revolutionary communist and sit down and talk, we'd be happy to do that.
If you're not yet organized, get a bundle of the communists today and start a cell. You can join and subscribe to our paper at communistusa.org/join and use this paper to agitate in your workplaces or at street corners. Talk to your coworkers and your friends like our comrades are doing every day in a city near you.
That their money built all of this. But where did they get their money from? From us! From our labor. Without our labor, this city would not run a single day.
There's someone listening to this who is frustrated with our government. If you are someone who believes that the working class person should be in charge, and someone who believes in revolutionary action as the only means to achieve a better world,
The capitalists, we need to overthrow their system. Read the revolutionary way forward. Join the communists in this fight. There's only one way, and that way is revolution.
and I am ready to do something about it. But are we going to do that alone? No! We are here, we're ready to fight, and it is time to see the third American Revolution. So forward, comrades, to the third